to a bonus episode of Solve This Murder. So I'm just Bill.
And I'm just Ken. Wait.
No, wait. That's not right.
It might be right.
This is an episode in between our mysteries. So this is not the start of a new mystery for people who are like, oh my God, a new mystery. But there will be one soon. Dani, I know that the plan for our next mystery is that you've got a...
Little baby speed one.
Another Agatha Christie, this time a short story rather than a novel.
Yeah, it might be done in one episode. I don't know.
It might be done in one episode. We'll find out. But that'll be the next one. And then after that, there's another whole original mystery that I'm partway through writing. I'm really excited about it. I think it won't have quite the... I'm intrigued as to how people will take it because I don't think it has the same sort of immediate, like, weirdness of, like, in the air or in VR.
But you said you think it's going to be really satisfying as a mystery.
I think it'll be a very solid mystery.
I'm looking forward to it.
So this bonus episode, I wanted to talk about how we write the mysteries. Now, for our other show, Escape This Podcast, we have before done, like, this is how you write a escape room. This is how you write the puzzles for an escape room. And we've made those as these sort of, here's how you can try it at home episodes, instructional episodes. And people have really enjoyed that and they found a lot of value out of it. I don't think we'll be able to get as precise with how to write the mysteries.
Not at all, especially looking at my notes. Like, you have, I think, written just better ones than I have and just run them better. So your notes are a lot more comprehensive than mine have ever been. So I think that people should trust what you say more than they trust me. But I'm pretty sure looking at mine super briefly right now, mine are all very different from one another. So
you don't have like a formula that you have approached in writing those original mysteries?
I haven't noticed one yet. Maybe as I keep looking, I'll spot something.
Because I was thinking the same thing, like looking at how we've written them. I've got my notes in front of me as well. Not my finished notes that I have available in the autopsies for my previous mysteries, but the ones that as I wrote them. So I'd be interested in going back and looking at the ones that I've done and the ones that you've done and sort of talking about the process or the steps that we took. I'm maybe a little bit better than you in terms of I can only think when I'm writing things down. So all of my steps are pretty much written down, whereas you probably do a lot more in your head and then you write out the finished product.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe your notes won't be quite as elucidating.
Well, you never know because I do have a lot of notes that don't make it into the final in this case or things that just change subtly, all that sort of stuff. I don't know. I've got more bits and pieces than I would normally for an Escape This Podcast.
Okay, well, I would like to have a starting question, which I don't know if you have an answer to, which is, if you're coming up with a mystery, let's say specifically in this context of Solve This Murder, you're coming up with a Solve This Murder style, solvable murder mystery.
Yep.
Do you have a consistent first step, like the first idea?
Exactly the same as Escape This Podcast, actually. I need a setting.
So you go for a setting.
I need the room that it happened. Or just like, what is the conceit that connects these people together?
Okay. So you'll think like reality show.
Exactly.
Mystics house, a house party with some rich guy.
I'm going to see if I can take a look. So my first one, if you remember, just the lab one, I haven't even mentioned that it's a lab one. It doesn't mention, I just go straight past it. Like the idea that it was set in a lab isn't even mentioned. Apparently it was just a given. Next one, the first words are fortune teller murder. Next one from there says survivor-esque. Rich people New York penthouse party.
Interesting. I would say that my approach...
Rockstar found dead in tour bus.
Now, see, this is the thing. That is slightly more similar to mine, which is, I think, explicitly my first step is the body.
Interesting. That takes me a bit longer.
In no way is it the reason for the murder. I don't even know who the body is yet. But my opening step for both of these, I think, of the ones I've done so far, and it has been my opening step for this third one as well that I'm writing, has been, here's the body. I get like an image of like, ooh, it's a dead body found here, which I think is slightly different from just having the setting. So like my last one, Virtual Victim, and for people who are listening who have not listened to our earlier mysteries, I will be avoiding spoilers, I think. In the majority. We'll try not to do massive spoilers, but at least for the settings and the ideas and like maybe that initial hook, we're probably spoiling episode 1 for each of the mysteries, perhaps. So that for me was, I wanted a murder that you see in VR. Like I wanted the moment. It's that moment of finding the body of like, or seeing the body. I didn't know who was going to be murdered in VR. I didn't know how we ended up in that situation. It was just, hey, I would like you see a murder, but the whole thing, you just see a VR avatar get murdered.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I feel like I start with an image, but it's very much more the image of the room than the image of a dead person.
Yeah, whereas I had no concept. And same with the one in the air was a bit more the setting based, right? I want it on a plane, but I want it on a plane. There's a person in the seat next to you. You think they're sleeping, and boom, they're dead. It's the body. That's sort of first step.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so far from my first step, the visualization of a body.
I'm trying to see if I can find my original notes for the start of this. I mean, it was kind of just like murder on a flight, and then the murder happens while chatting with a flight attendant or going to the back. Like, so I want it to happen on the flight. Someone like right nearby. Yeah. Already, my fourth dot point is Dani's sitting next to murder victim. So again, this is not getting past the first episode, but you know.
What are the dot points that happened before that?
So this is a little bit more setting back, right? It's murder on a flight.
Uh-huh.
Dani called to fly across for sleuth convention. While on small flight, meet cast of characters. Murder happens while chatting. Sitting next to murder victim. I would have written those out in one. That would have just been me going doop, 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 doop. So I think I had that idea of you're chatting, you come back to your seat, and bang, the person next to you is dead. And so for my third one, I've got that as well. So to me, that's step one. Is I want a almost like a moment. Like I can feel that hook. I can feel that moment of like, and here's the body, and then I try and build around that.
Yeah.
So I fundamentally come up with that first.
Interestingly, the last one that I can find of mine written in here, the hairdresser, does start out like that. My very first thing that I have written on my spread here is in hairdresser, owner's body in chair at hair washing station, throat cut by scissors, wound hidden under towel.
No,
I got everything in that
hook,
one sentence.
I see, because I like that.
That's the only time that I have that out of all of my notes.
And my next one is the same. I've come up with like the very first step for my third mystery, which I won't spoil at all because it hasn't come out yet. We haven't recorded yet. I haven't been writing it yet. But again, the first moment I had of that was like, oh, it's going to be a murder that looks like this. Like here's how it's going to be seen. Here's how it's going to be discovered. And then quickly went into the next steps of a fun little tweak to it. But that was always my first step.
You know what's interesting? I have one unrecorded one as well. So you don't know anything about this one either, but we've got it in the bag if we ever want to go to it.
Sure.
It does, again, it starts with just 3 words of the setting, but then it's a paragraph. I've gone into the story.
Oh, fun.
So this one was different. Like, look at this. Like, don't look at it, but look,
that's
just
a
2
solid
paragraphs of story.
Yeah. So my next question is, where do you go after that? That's a first point. Setting or body, like setting or like that moment of murder. But how do you follow up? Do you have a set way of following up?
The majority of the time, by the looks of it, my next thing is to list out the people.
That's interesting. Fundamentally not my next step. Now, people talk about this a lot when you're writing mysteries, about how when you decide who the murderer is or that sort of idea. And that, at least for you, seems like you kind of put it off slightly more, perhaps.
Yes.
You go, here's the setting. Now,
here's what has to be here.
Yeah, and then you go, well, here are all the people.
This is exactly like how I do Escape This podcast, where I do the setting and then I do the objects that must be in the room, and then I worry about how they connect to each other.
But my thing, I believe, is my general thought is I go, who's been killed? And I go, next question, why? I just think, why has a person been killed? And I take longer to flesh out my character list because, like, so for this, my notes again, back for in-flight incident, it is go straight to who is dead and why. And now I'll be much more vague on the details, sorry for people, but you will still get the idea. So I've come up with the death, and now I say, I start to try and list people who, like, I've kind of almost gone into some characters, but not quite. I've gone mostly to the victim, started trying to get some ideas. Do you know what's at the bottom of my first page of notes for in-flight incident? This is only for people who've listened to it. Still only first episode spoilers. 3 wives, 2 successful businesses, and 1 beautiful horse. But yeah, so I keep looking. So I'm just doodling. I'm coming up with this stuff. I'm putting in details all about the victim. I'm writing a whole dossier. I haven't got any other characters. I'm writing an entire page on who the victim is all these details about them, how he gets killed. I've gone through the method before I've even got a motive yet. All of the ins and outs of, oh, he's going to do this is going to happen to kill him. I still have not got the why yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do I come up with the why really late, or do I just not write it down because it's a given? Like my very first one, the lab one, look, I got one whole page of notes going on here, and then motive right at the top of page 2. That's ages.
Well, I can tell you exactly what I've done here. Because I noticed I got confused, everybody, because I've written to myself, okay, now we know the why and the how. And I was like, but I haven't written the why. Literally, I wrote all this detail about who the victim is. And then one of the elements, as I was writing out ideas, I went, oh, that's it. And I ticked it off and I put the word motive. I still don't know who did it. I just said, this is the fundamental issue that causes their death.
Interesting.
So I've come up with multiple different issues and like multiple elements of his life that could stem to have other conflicts or red herrings. But I've basically written the whole outline of who they are, picked one element of that outline and said that's the motive of why they are killed. Then I came up with how they are killed. I still don't know who did it. But I built it around the victim. And I want to see if I've done something similar for VR, for the virtual one. So I'd like to go back. And obviously these things get iterated and changed as we go, right? So the motives and the methods will possibly change as you think them through and you rewrite. But for now, it's interesting. So again, I've done the same thing here. VR murder. I've gone, here's the basic couple of dot points of what it is, right? Multiplayer game. Someone is killed when they're streaming. There's recorded footage. Maybe, someone was streaming it. Maybe this person's a streamer. And then I went straight into a bit of the method or like the details of what that looks like. My next question, who's the victim? Who is the victim? And I started going like streamer, crossed it out. Popular, crossed that out. Change it to, or maybe like game dev. Here's a bit about their character. Here's what they're doing. Here's stuff they've done that's bad. Here is this, that, and the other. I tried to add in a slightly different element to it because there was something I wanted to shoehorn into the mystery. But it's pretty much just that. I've gone back through the reasoning, the why would they be killed, what's going on. And it's only after that I really start to try and put in the characters and fit them all together. So I think for me, consistently, and I've done the same for my most recent one as well. I'm noticing I'm following this pattern as well. So it is very much step 1, what's the murder? Step 2, who's the victim? And then from all the information I have about the victim, which of these elements of their life causes a murder?
Yeah.
And then once I've done that, I then go, okay, cool. Obviously, you can't have a murder mystery where the only two characters are the victim and the killer. So
then you flesh out.
Then
people.
I go, let's get a good list of characters. Who would this person have in their life? Or like who is natural to this situation? So I don't try and, make up anything weird here. I just look at the situation. I go, what does this need? Like the flight, I was like, okay, I've got, we have to have a flight attendant. We have to have pilots, but I'll keep them away so they don't exist so that it's simpler. And then I want characters from... Because now I can put the characters not just from the setting that we're in, but also from what I know about the victim. Like, well, if he's a business person, he'll have a former business rival.
Yeah.
He'll have a business partner. He'll have someone who wanted to work for him. He'll have this, that, and so.
So you connected it to the victim more than to the setting.
Dependent on the setting. So in my plane one, a plane doesn't really fundamentally have too much.
True.
Right? Anyone can be on a plane.
Yeah.
For the virtual reality one, I went, well, we need someone to have recorded this footage. So I need a streamer. I probably want a second person who's not quite the streamer, but is like a friend of, because I think that's a fun dynamic. You sometimes get that in real life. You have streamers and like, here's my friend. They don't really stream, but I wanted someone to fill in the game. So I like that dynamic. And then I went, but also now that I know the victim does this job, I'll add in a business person. Here's a rival. Because to me, I think those are the two sources for why these characters in the scene. Is the relationship to the victim and relationship to the scenario. So I think I like doing both the main idea of what the murder is, then the main idea of who the victim is, get who murdered them, at least the archetype of who murdered them, and then build my character list. So I do that slightly different order to you.
Apparently, quite different. I just want to say I like one that I have found. This is not a Solve This Murder. This was a murder mystery evening that I wrote for my family a while ago. And what I have done was, so I came up with all of the characters who were involved, which is interesting, a bit meta, because all of the people there were people who had played characters, because it was like actory, theatery themed. I had written out a list of 7 possible motives, and I've just genericized them. They are love, theater, degree, friendship, money, family, crime. And then I wrote the victim, all of the characters, I put in a little circle around them, and I made little lines connecting them, and I just said, which of these is related? Like, this person, crime, money, crime, theater, love, degree related. And so I just found, what is their major connection to the murder victim?
That's fun.
Which was an interesting one.
You don't go for emotional connections compared to my very pragmatic, like, they worked together on a project 4 years ago.
Well, luckily for this one, the connection between them was already known, and it was all exactly the same. They had all worked together.
Flavor the connection.
Exactly. But for example, in Hairdresser, I told you what my first sentence was. It's, here's this victim in their hair washing station. And then immediately after that, it just says assistant manager, last customer, brother, apprentice. And if you recall, like, the rival hairdresser, the flamboyant man, was not even a character.
Oh, that's true. He's the best guy in the
and
story.
yet he wasn't
anyway.
even in my notes.
So I have a question so far.
Yeah.
What you've come up with a list of characters, and you've done them primarily based on who is a natural fit for the situation.
Yes.
I've done mine similarly. I've kind of added a natural fit for the situation and the victim's life. But I've not yet characterized them in any way.
No, that took a tiny hint longer.
When you're doing that, which I'm assuming, because that's my next step pretty much. Once I've done that, my next step for both of these, once I've got that description, like if I go back to my in-flight notes, I said, now the why and the how.
Page flicking.
Now I need to know the characters. And so I've done little, like, here's a list of people, here's like a 1-sentence elevator pitch for who they are. And then, then I started trying to get the timeline done, more about method. But then I just start writing out a page for every person. And specifically for people who are intrigued as to how I write my characters' pages, like the notes for them, generally I have a system of, I put their name, I do a series of dot points that is just sort of their whole shtick. It is what they were doing, what they think, like the kind of person they are. And then I specifically have a little table that I draw at the bottom of every page, which has all the other characters' names listed and what this character thinks of them or would say about them.
Yes.
So that's so I build like a little short answer section of here's me, here's my deal, and then a table of here's what I think their deal is, here's what I think about that person, I think they were doing something suspicious. So that when the detective goes, what do you think about whoever, they say, well, they seem kind of odd. Like, I lost them for a while. I was looking for them yesterday, but I couldn't. And you get those sorts of connections. And I did that mostly because you always admonished me for not asking about that as much in mine. So I was like, well, Dani will be more keen to ask that. I know that Dani will want to build those lines. But I think it's a good way to deal with it, because it also allows you, if you want them to suddenly offer information, if the detective isn't asking it, you have kind of pre-written, like, here's where they're going to try and cast suspicion, or here's a thing they could add. Hey, do you know that I saw this person go up and ask for a food allergy thing? And
it is interesting because nowhere in my notes do I have it as here's what blah blah thinks of blah blah. I very much seem to have split mine into what do they reveal and what do they conceal. Very much in a how to host a murder style.
That's a very how to host a murder style thing, and that's where we've done a lot more of our murder mystery games before this. So you would have that for your characters. You would write, here's what they're just going to offer up, and here's what they're going to need to be, what's going to need to be needled out of them. Did you have some stuff that's like, they will never say this, but there's a piece of evidence somewhere that might lead you to it?
Oh, eventually, after somewhere else in my notes, I also just have a list of clues, evidence, and testimony, just all of the dot points that you can figure out, either from the people or from elsewhere. It is just the conglomeration, and often as we are going through the mystery, I'll be like ticking them off.
So, from a more practical point of view,
Mhm.
we seem like we've reached the same step, right? We've gone murder. I've done a little bit more about motive and things like that, but we've gotten to cast of characters. And we're picking them based on the pragmatic existence in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have advice for how do I make these characters interesting or stand out or give them a feeling or give them something to do?
Again, I am very much going with this has been different in every single one,
Sure.
how I've done them. So like in the early days, no, not at all. And I really struggled because of that.
Mm.
But then we've got like for hairdresser. So I've got my list of characters, just assistant manager, last customer, brother, apprentice. Right under that, I say which one of them did the murder and what they did a little bit. That's what this tiny paragraph is.
Sure.
Then after that, I have listed out all of the people in more detail. I've given them a name. I've given them an age. I've given them a character in 3 words or less.
Yes, and I think that's good.
And then I've given them a secret.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I think that is good, especially when you're considering these as games to play rather than stories to write, is having a very, like, super compact descriptor of how this person is in general, right? Stuff like, nervous weirdo.
Yes.
That kind of idea, emotionless, like very detail oriented. Like when you have that, it allows you to go, oh, I'm into that character's mindset. So when I'm playing this and I'm running it, I can be like, oh, I need to be like a person who's like super emotionless but cares about the numbers and the facts. Great.
Mm-hmm.
That's an easy thing to do. So when you say, what do you think of Mary? Instead of being like, well, Mary's an idiot, I say, which one's Mary?
Yeah.
The one with the hair.
Exactly.
Oh, of course, the one who did this. Yeah. So, well, and like you play the character and you make them feel distinct. And I think that also helps when you're writing, that once you know their sort of archetype, you kind of, when you're trying to describe like, well, who would know that? I want to get this piece of information into the story. Who's going to be able to supply that? And you're like, the person who has an emotional feeling that matches it, right? If I know one of my characters is a gossip, and I also know that I need to get across the idea that 2 people were fighting over something, great, you give it to the gossip. Now the gossip can be like, ha ha ha, I'm going to say that. Like, I think for In-Flight Incident, I had that as a fun way of using, one of the people wanted to be involved in the mystery and wanted to like give all these like, oh, could have been this, could have been that. And I used that to get a few extra little details of like, hey, if you hadn't been considering this person, maybe here's a thing they did. Oh, I want to tell you about a thing that I saw someone do because we're solving a mystery together. And so you can get stuff across that doesn't naturally come out for a person who's like, I just want to get off this plane. I just want to go home. They're not going to say, oh, I really just want to go home. Did you hear that 2 people were talking about this in the corridors? Like, no, that's crazy. You find a character that matches their vibe. So that's a kind of a nice way to do it.
Which is funny because that vibe tends to make me uncomfortable. I want to be on my own.
Yeah. Weirdly, for some of these, that kind of ends there. Like, one thing I've sort of skimmed over here is I've come up with, for my character, the reason that they have murdered. But it is good, I think, to have a couple of other things which are not red herrings, but they are other elements of contention with their character that you can dispel by research, by doing the investigation. So you want things that sometimes could feel like a red herring. It's like, here's a tantalizing clue. Here's a tantalizing, like, these 2 people were fighting, and it turns out that has nothing to do with the murder. But you want those things there so people can be like, well, I also know that these 2 people were fighting. Could that have led to a murder? Let me go doop to doop to doop to doop. Here's evidence A, here's evidence B, here's what this person said. You know what? No. I think that proves that this other chain is not the reason.
Okay.
But that is different from like a red herring where it's like, oh, why did I even bother looking at that? Because it's an investigation. You want to have like multiple elements that could be a motive for murder.
Yeah, that's fine.
But if you do, you need to fundamentally define them as, where's the evidence that says this wasn't a problem, if that makes sense. You want to have a thing that rules it out rather than just ending with, well, it could have been A or B or C, but it turns out it was B.
Oh, yeah.
You want it to be, it could have been A, B, or C, but then I figured out this means it can't be A, this means it can't be C, and this means it can definitely be B. You want something positive for the real motive, and you want some point that is negative for all the other possible motives.
You definitely need something positive. I've done some murder mystery games where it was literally just ruling people out, and the only one that you didn't end up crossing off was the murderer.
That's not a good feeling.
That's not satisfying.
Right? So for all of your possible motives, I think it's good to look at them and say, well, here's the thing that clinches the real motive, gets you to be like, that's it. Not necessarily something super obvious, but you want it to be like, you know what, yes, it has to have been that. And you need something that denies the other possible motives.
Yeah.
If they're not there, the solution's super easy. You know, here's a guy, he's been killed. He had one enemy, and his enemy is over there, and he has a knife. You're like, great, well, it's that guy. It's the enemy with a knife. Like, what are you talking about? Let's go home. So you need some other elements. But I think that's a good way to look at it. Because the thing that I think neither of us do, but sometimes gets put out as advice for murder mystery writing, is that, like, deciding who did the murder is, like, the final step.
Oh, yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
I'm not a fan of that. And I think maybe that's more viable when you're writing, possibly. If you like, it's the final step of your first skeleton of the plot. Maybe that makes sense. But I don't like it because, especially for our context, for our format.
Like, inevitably got a million red herrings. And,
exactly.
Like, I suppose if you're a really stringent editor, you will go and fix it so those aren't there. But then why bother? You just spend a lot of time putting them in.
Yeah, true.
And now you just got to get rid of them and only leaving the actual important ones. That's not a fun way of writing for me.
Yeah, so I like the idea of, that's why I think I come up with the murder first, and then I build everything else around the murder to, like, couch it and hide it and make it less obvious. But I do go, here's the murder.
Yeah, and I'm not that behind, not that far behind when I do that. I just come up with the necessary things for here first, and then how murder.
Yeah, and that's sort of another element of the way I do. I come up with the murder by going, well, here's all the information about the victim. Which of these things leads to his death? And you sort of go, well, here's now everything that's in the scene. All right, now I know all the people and the victim. Which one of these relationships could lead to his death, or which one of these, you know? Do you have any rules, do you think? And I know you don't, so we'll be coming up with these on the spot. Do you have any rules for what makes a good motive? For if you're looking at stuff, how do you determine, like, that's not going to be good, or that's not going to be satisfying, or, you know, it turns out I killed him because he owes me $2 is obviously bad. Because you'd be like, well, why don't you just bloody get over it?
I think this is what I find the hardest part of all of this, because any motive that you can describe in 1 to 5 words feels like it's been done a million times.
Yes.
They have. Like, look at those ones I named. Love, money, crime. Yeah, none of these sound interesting. So you've got to figure out some really personal way that you can feel that this led to a murder. There's got to be something.
Hell, I've written 2 and I've already had big business disputes as the possible thing, right? Like, it is tough because the thing with murder mysteries like these are generally you don't murder people.
There aren't that many things that can drive someone to murder.
And then murder mysteries also have to be, like, satisfying. Like, if it ends up being, oh, why was this person driven to murder? Well, like, they've just got, like, terrible psychosis and they weren't quite sure what was going on and they just ended up killing a person.
Really.
You're like, oh, that's both not interesting to figure out and kind of vilifying of people with mental issues, even if it can be true that some people who kill each other do so just because they have mental issues that lead to it. And then you have the real mystery is like, all right, now why didn't this person get proper care? Let's solve that mystery. You know, it's a hard thing to do because you do need to have a murder that has a real reason. And you want it to be something that is, here's why they had to do it, right? Here's why, in their head, murder was the only option for this, right? Here's how they, like, here's the value of what they would lose in their head if they didn't do the murder, you know? Or, so I've done two, and I will say, without trying not to spoil it, that, you know, one of mine was a bit more of like a calculated
This
thing,
is exactly
what
I was
less
going to say
calculated.
next. One was very spontaneous. One was slightly more of a planned one. And I'm thinking the same thing. I've got a couple in front of me right now that I'm looking at, and both of them were spontaneous because whatever they had been doing was discovered.
Yes. And I think for me, the determination of what's going to be spontaneous and what's going to be premeditated was based on the nature of the motive. Because I picked the motive first. So then you go, well, based on that motive, are you going to plan the murder? Or are you going to just do it straight? You know, if the motive is like an argument, a fight, like a moment of, then the murder can happen in the moment. And it should, right? It is very, very different for two people to be arguing and someone gets angry and kills. If it's two people argue and then that person goes home and plans a murder, it's like, whoa, that person's like evil. Like that's and then we start dealing with that being about the person rather than about the moment, you know? Like you don't want something, or it's hard, it's interesting, but it's hard sometimes when the motive is like, here's a motive for murder, which 99% of people would have the exact same situation and they wouldn't get anywhere close to murder. But this one person, because he's a big old murderer, turned it into murder, is less satisfying because it's hard to solve that, right?
Yeah.
Like there is 100% in the real world, there are people where you could say to them, oh, hey, mate, nice hat, ha, 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 and then you walk away, and there'll be someone in the world who'll go, that person needs to die. And they'll go home and they'll plan a murder for this dude that they don't know who at a party said they had a bad hat, and then they will chase them down, and like 2 years later they'll be like, how's my hat now? And kill them, and the person will be like, what are you talking about, while they die, right? That's 100% a way certain people can be. Certain people's brains don't work in the same way that they'll just like stew on that forever. They've had something in their past and that will cause them to kill. That's a hard murder to solve because you'd look at that motive and be like, well, that's not a motive for murder. He said you had a bad hat.
Yeah.
Just feel bad about yourself and move on. It's like, no, someone's going to murder because of that motive. But that's not a good motive for a detective to try and solve in a gamified murder mystery.
No, not so much. Very difficult. Sometimes I'm looking back at these. I do not remember what some of my motives were. They were too long ago.
I think that's a good way to look at it is like, if it's in the moment, you just have to go, you need to be like, okay, well, what can make someone's emotions go real high? What can I do to be like, da-da-da-da-da?
Sure.
If you can get that feeling, we've got the motive. And if it's not in the moment, if it's premeditated, I think a good way to look at it is, what can I put up as the like consequences of not murdering? You know, it's this person murdered. Why? Well, look at here. Here I've presented you, and as a detective, you can uncover these are the consequences of this character not murdering the victim.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think those consequences are big enough? Right? When one character's like, he owed me $100. Consequences of not murdering the victim. There's like someone else in the future won't be scared of you and won't give you $100. Okay, that's nothing. That's an angry thing, but you wouldn't kill them because it's better to keep them alive so you can give me my $100 back. All right, cool. Oh, there's an inheritance. So if you kill him, suddenly you get $10 million. That's okay. But still, if I said to a random person on the street, hey, I'll give you $10 million if you kill that guy over there, you'd be like, I'm probably not going to do that, right? So that's not quite enough.
It's really difficult.
So then you have to also add but you're going to not like it.
This is why character is so important to these. You have to make it, just an abstract motive I don't think is ever going to be enough when you try to describe it that way. So the relationship matters. It's like, if I get $10 million for killing someone, I'm not going to kill them. If I feel like they personally stole that inheritance from me, if it's my mother was going to give me $10 million in her inheritance, and then the nurse came in and started wooing my mother, I feel like, and stole her away from us, and then she gave it all to this newcomer who's been in her life for a year, that's theft of my money. You don't deserve the money, and I do. So I'm going to kill you. Like, you have to add the personal element that isn't just, would you like millions of dollars to kill a person? No. Would you like your $1 million back from the person who stole it by killing them? Yes. And so you have to color in that relationship to add now I get why you also kind of wanted to murder them too. Even if they're wrong, because they're probably wrong. You know
they're a murderer.
What's fascinating? I have insane pages of notes for my survivor one. Like, more than any other thing, I have ridiculous notes that I'm sure never got used. I have no idea who the murderer was based on these notes. Not even a slight clue. I also have an
no.
interesting one where I've listed out the characters with pluses and minuses next to their
Ooh.
names, which are like guilt or innocence signs, like reasons you might suspect them, reasons you might rule them out.
Oh, nice.
But I have no idea which of them did the murder.
Oh, how funny. Well, okay, we've been talking a lot about this. Do we have actionable advice for people?
No, I don't know what I'm doing, and anything that I have said is not a given for any of my stories. It's basically whichever one had the neatest written notes, that's what I've been looking at, which has been hairdresser, it
I
looks
will
like.
say, I reckon here's a piece of actionable advice for people
Mhm.
based on what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Build a setting that makes sense as your first, like early on, right? So that, right? So you either pick the setting and you build the cast of characters based on what would be in that setting,
Mhm.
or you get the victim, you understand about them, and then you fill out a cast of characters that matches who they are as a person.
Do you? I feel the setting definitely has to be there, because if you absolutely start with the victim and then worry about the characters, you could accidentally put them somewhere that's not closed enough.
Also true. So I think those two together. It's I add a bit more victim before I come up with cast of characters, but either way, it's setting and victim, or setting, or and then you build who are people who should naturally be there.
Yes.
Then you start to work out all their secrets, all their motives, all their murders, because that makes the whole thing feel real.
Starting with motives and that sort of thing is too clinical.
It starts to shoehorn people in as
Yeah.
well. You'd be like, and then maybe someone like was at the same orphanage as them when they were a kid, and then you pull in a bunch of orphans, and you're like, where did these orphans come from? What's happening now? Here's their twin brother. Like, those are, if you go too hard into like, here are the cool weirdo people I want to see, and then you try and fit them all into a place, they're going to feel out of place. So I think building a place, building a person, and then saying who is naturally associated with this person and place that can come in here. Weird hotel, and then you add a victim as this person. You go, great, now I can add other people who would be in a weird hotel, and who would the victim bring with him to a weird hotel.
The funny part is that if you look at books and how they do this, this is not what they would do at all. Like, you think about Agatha Christie's, they will put them in a location, but many of the locations are things like a plane, where it is a motley crew that, as far as we know, don't really know each other, and finding out whether they secretly do know each other or if something happened just when they first met each other right now. That is part of the mystery. And anyone who would naturally be there, like the pilot, the hostess, or whatever, aren't often important. They are dismissed as characters in the books. Whereas for me, and a little bit for you, we're saying, no, those are necessary components because they are there.
Because they are there. Look, this is a classic piece of murder mystery trope culture, which is don't mind the help. Don't worry about them. The amount of times, like, there were only 8 people, or like, there were 3 people in the room. There was Madame Crawley, there was the Duke, and there was Dr. Richardson. The only 3 people in the room. So the 4 butlers were walking around, and then they left, and then the maid came in and dropped this off. But the only 3
Is this
real
why
human
the butler
people,
did it was such a shock to people at the
'cause they were
time?
like, well, it couldn't be
It's
the
a
butler.
person?
That's not a real thing. So I think we're just culturally removed from that because we don't have help. And so you're more inclined to be like, well, people are there. They can do stuff, right?
Exactly.
In the modern context, you're less likely to discount the help or discount the staff.
And I think that changes what sort of locations we feel suitable as well. Because, something like a hotel, to me, oh my God, that is huge unless we have some way to limit it to this floor at this time of day. That cuts out 90% of the staff and things like that.
You want to find ways to cut the staff out because you know that if they're there, you got to use them.
Exactly.
And I think you can't, especially in this context as well, where Agatha Christie can say, okay, in this context, the flight attendants don't matter. And then she can just say, Poirot will also think this and he will not talk to them. Done.
Yeah.
But we don't have control over the detective. So we're putting people in front of the detective and then saying, here's a person. Hey, don't talk to him because I don't think they deserve to be talked to. It's like, no, you can't do that. They will follow up because as a human, you talk to people, right? You're less likely to just be like, nah, the person who ran the cashier doesn't exist.
Exactly. Like, if we're going to do that, we might as well just put them in the middle of a crowd at Times Square and walk around to all the tourists who all say, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. And you've got to go through 30 variations of that before you find any information.
Yeah.
Like, that's the equivalent of putting in a worker who isn't important to the story.
Exactly right. So I think that's good.
But then
actionable
you
advice
also
as
have
well.
the interesting balance of all of your characters have to matter, but they can't all be secretly hiding a blackmail, robbery, murder from their past because that's too melodramatic.
Yes. So you need to have enough lines of inquiry that it's not just the only thing to question is the answer will be that's the murderer. So you want a few other things to question, but yes, I think that's also a good thing. We often have 6 people in the scene as like a plus or minus X kind of thing, like around 6 people. You don't want to have 6 people who are all like, but now you've discovered my secret, because you're right, that's wild. Which is why it's nice to give certain people like a role in the story that is not obviously immediately clear, like this person is above reproach, but you should still be using your list in a way that, you know what, if someone tries to invent a secret for them, fine, but that's not their role. Like I had this in Virtual Victim, I had certain characters whose roles were more about giving information and more about flavoring the scene. And that's fine, because as long as they are characters, it won't feel like they're just there for exposition, right? To the fact where a lot of times I have exposition characters that in my mind are there to give information, not to really be a proper candidate for murder. I've had plenty of people email in saying, it was them, they did the murder, Fantastic. It was definitely them, because they are human enough that they're interesting, but I don't have their role. So like if you dig into them, they might be interesting enough that you dig, but when you dig, you'll be like, that's just dirt. There's just dirt the whole way down. There's no treasure under here. And that's fine, right? They're just a normal person in that scene. So you give them a role without that role being secret backstory, evil past, right? Because it kind of then diminishes when you do find the secret backstory. You know, give 1 or 2 people something. So maybe one person gets a secret backstory, another person gets an interesting new nugget of information that makes you reevaluate who they are. But if everyone's like that, it's a pantomime.
If you have other characters who are not the murderer, who have some dark secret or whatever going on, how important do you think it is to relate that tangentially to the murder happening?
I think you can avoid relating. I think it's important. You don't have to do it, but I think when you don't do it, it's kind of funny. And I think it's fine to have a moment that's funny, but it is kind of, if you find out that someone was like, my father abandoned me 10 years ago and my inheritance was stolen by someone in a completely different room. It has nothing to do with what we're doing here.
And yet something that is much more doable in an Agatha Christie, where it's the murder happened. Also, there's a jewelry robber on board. Nothing to do with the murder, completely irrelevant, but some of the clues are about the jewelry that we don't care about.
Yeah. In this case, I don't like, if there's like a second crime going on, it has to
have impacted something.
Yes,
because the jewelry robber was in that room, the murderer couldn't sneak through there, which is why a clue was left in this other strange place.
I think that's the best way to use outside mystery. Something where it's like, oh, I have my own thing going on. But once you've discovered my own thing that was going on that isn't related, there's one element of it that makes you go, wait a minute, if you were doing that, that means
way more fun.
All of the doors had to have been locked because you're a lock obsessive person who loves to lock every door you ever see.
Exactly.
And now that I've discovered the secret that you love to lock every door, how did that person get in? They just said they walked in. That meant they must have had a key. Okay, thank you, weird lock person.
Again, is so hard to make sure that whichever one of us is solving notices that. It's really difficult.
But I think that's a good rule of thumb. If there's something on the side, even if it's not related, there has to be an element that affects the main plot line.
I would hope so. Again, no guarantees that I've achieved this and done this in any way. I'm positive that I haven't, but that's a goal.
I feel like I did that a little bit with in the in-flight incident. I had one character who everybody suspected for a while, but they were completely innocent. But their relationship with somebody else about how innocent they were made you go, wait a minute. That means that this character was like this. That whole tangent made me learn a new fact about one of the characters, which means that their relationship with this other person is relevant, right? Like you have to connect something from a side mystery back to the main mystery.
If you are going to do a red string, all of your red string, you could do this with one string.
Ideally.
You can't cut your string anywhere.
Yeah, you might have to loop it a little bit.
Sure.
But it should all kind of, everything should have an effect on the path of your final solve. So, We're 45 minutes in. I think we need to finish this episode.
It's very haphazard. I wouldn't say it's particularly ordered.
But I would like to say, here's where I think we're at. I think we are. This is our advice. If you want to write one of these, it is the following. And Dani, you chime in if you think any of these are wrong.
I've still got more questions about things if you think these things need to be included.
Okay, then ask me.
Okay, timeline, yes or no?
100% murder dependent.
Fair.
The timeline, although I will say, and this is pragmatic advice, if you're running this, you will be asked about the timeline.
Yes.
You'll always be asked. So I think having a timeline is not necessary from a murder point of view, but I will say it is necessary from running the game point of view. You can have an irrelevant timeline for a murder where the timeline isn't really that relevant. But I think you do need to know when everything happened. I've changed my mind mid-sentence. Yes, 100% necessary for these games explicitly.
Yeah, it may not be essential for your murder and for the solve, but for the game playing, yes.
For allowing it to... Because that's where people get the most red herrings, is if you don't know the timeline. Yeah. And you go, that happened at 8 o'clock. And then 2 episodes later, someone says, hey, when was this going on? You're like, I don't know, 8 o'clock. And they'll go, wait a minute, if these two things happen at 8 o'clock,
very much
that's
so.
the minute. You're like, no, I didn't mean that. Yeah. So timeline, I think, is necessary for the pragmatic purpose of playing the game.
And I know that the biggest thing that has helped me, I mentioned that I have a list of dot points of all the clues and testimony and evidence and things that you can find. Sometimes I've got like little brackets about who has this information, like which of the characters you could potentially get this from, where you might find it. I've got a... evidence that is currently on the scene of the crime, like physical evidence that you can find there. I often have a little section for that. But for me, I think the one that has been most important, especially for these Agatha Christie-based ones that I have been doing, not just my own ones, I have a little section called just Detective's Path, which is, fingers crossed, ideally the order that I want you to do things, with variation possible, and it can be very vague. Like, obviously, the first thing I have here is investigate crime scene. That's probably where I want you to go first. And then I just have, I tried to narrow it down so that it wasn't too open. And I've said, these witnesses are available to you. And then I have a thing where the next thing will not happen until you have learned this fact. So sometimes I want the order to be more rigid because it helps me keep things under control.
I think that is something that is good. And I've been doing that a little bit more with my second one rather than my first. And I think it will come into play in the third one as well, which is... the scope is interesting. So we generally, for a lot of ones you made and the first one I made, have had a scope that is step 1. Everything is available to you. Pick one of X things. So there are 7 people to talk to. Great. Pick one of these people at random. And that becomes quite hard to direct, right? Yeah. So I think you are right. I think it is good advice. And I did it for my second mystery. I think it worked really well, which is if I know there are going to be 7 people to talk to, I'll give you 3. I'll say, here are the 3 people that you can talk to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's more control to the start. And I know that one of these people is going to mention somebody else. Great, that gives you a 4th person. One of them is going to mention something else that if you investigated would give you another person. So that a few episodes in, you should have all 6 or 7, but not at the start. You allow it to open up because it also feels like you're digging a bit, right? It's not just let me collect everything and then try and put it together in a big stew. It's I'm going to look at this. Oh, I have 2 more things to look at from that. Or I could go back to one of my other 2 options. And it's like a branching, like it opens slowly, like a flower. And I think that is good. I think that is helpful for leading the investigation, and it's a good feeling.
It also means that you can control things in that way that books do, but you feel like you don't necessarily have that power, which is I just have one saying, cool, you just won't meet this character until this stuff has happened. This
then
is a
I'll
suspect,
just add them to the
but
scene.
It will not happen yet. And it's kind of nice to have that level of control. In one of my mysteries, I think I had one that was just called Deus Ex Machina. That's just the things that are going to happen when they've got to happen. Yeah. But they are not actually connected. You aren't going to direct those as the detective. They will just happen at set points.
Yeah. And I think that's something that maybe at first we were a little bit too shy to use.
Definitely.
But now it's like, no, that is also just how it happens, right? Like it is good to just, you want to slowly expand the scope. You know, if you want someone who's going to have a certain amount of information, but it's maybe too much information to get straight away, they're not here yet. They'll turn up on day 3.
Exactly.
They arrive by car and they say, what's going on here? My brother is dead. I didn't know this. Great. That's a fine way to introduce a character. And you hope that the detective's got enough information. You're like, cool. Hey, now that you're doing all this, you know, you found this, you found this, you found that. There's a knock at the door. Knock, knock, knock. Who's this? Oh, it's me, John. great. Like, you've added John in once, and it was, how long was John going to take to get here? He was going to get here as soon as the detective discovered there was a body in the cellar. That's the moment that now John arrives. He's always going to arrive at that moment. If you found that 2 seconds into the investigation, John got here day 1. If you found it in episode 4, John got here in day 3. So don't be afraid to trigger new characters with particular moments, the detective, right? You don't have to be like, damn it, I know that he's meant to arrive on the 3rd day, but Dani said she slept for 3 days. Oh, damn it. So no, okay, now he arrives on day 6, So feel free to do that. Okay, Dani, now we've only got 10 minutes left. I would like to give a quick summary, actionable list for anybody who wants to make one of these.
Amazing.
This is what I'm going to try and do. Here's what I'm going to say. Right. You want to write a murder mystery for one of these games. You want to write a Solve This Murder. 1, come up with the scenario.
Okay.
That might be just a setting. Maybe you don't know the murder yet. Maybe it's a murder and you need to make the setting. But try and get this idea of what is the kind of the elevator pitch of the episode. A murder in a penthouse at a party. That's fine. A murder on VR. That's fine. Like, get the elevator pitch. You then want to build a natural cast of characters before you come up with the weirdness of everyone's motives and stuff. A natural cast of characters. I usually do that by building up my victim first and then adding in people based on who he is. You might do it the other way around. But the victim is part of your natural cast of characters. So that's sort of happening in the same step, right? So 1, scenario. 2, a natural cast of characters. I would then say, for me, come up with the murder, the preciseness of it, like how did they die? Why did they die?
Sure.
And then with the remaining cast of characters, because now one of them killed him, assign how they're connected to each other, how they're connected to the victim. Give them fun little motivations. For every motivation that is not the motive that leads to murder, add some element that proves that it isn't. Give something that dissuades you from following that path. And for the one that is the murder, give it something that is fundamentally a gotcha moment. It's like that's it. It was that. Now I'm certain. If the people aren't certain when they guess it, if it's just, well, I ruled out everything else, you need to add something that will be like but it had to be because of this. Oh, it's CEO Jimmy. Right, you need that, right? I think that's, and then everything else is flesh them out. Give your characters an easy in for you to play them by giving them an archetype, giving them an emotional.
But from there, do not just have it as you've got a room full of people having with conversations. This is a game, they are trying to solve it. Have evidence, have list, have what you want the solver to find, because this is for the solver. It is a really hard job. You can't just give them a room and hope that the right things get said. You need to know what they need to know to solve the murder. I
would also say a good aspect that you can do when you're trying to get evidence in, come up with a list of facts that happen in the mystery. And then for each of those facts go, well, how would you know this?
How do they find out?
How could you find out this fact? And then put a piece of evidence for every fact. It could be, this character will tell you about this. Or there's a piece of physical evidence that would give you this. And once all of the beats of your mystery, once all you have a list of your facts, and each of those facts has a source of learning that fact, then you know it's solvable. You just go, wait, if they find these 12 things, they'll know all of the beats.
Mostly, yes. But the gamified way that we do this means that sometimes just having, this person will tell you if you ask them about this certain thing, that's never going to happen.
No,
so
you're right.
There need to be certain pushes. And
ways
hell, we're lucky. We're doing it on a podcast. We can push each other and then just cut it from the edit.
True.
But in the actual gameplay, that's a really difficult thing to get around.
So come up with the normal way, and then come up with a bit more of a give it to them way. But like, you know what? They haven't asked this person. I need someone to give this information. So you might end up needing to have some alternatives for how that fact can be delivered. All right. I think that's it.
I am impressed with your level of certainty of delivering this. I feel like I just haven't written enough of these to have a method, to have a direction to it. Like with This podcast, I'm relatively unchanging. And when things do change, it's like doesn't feel that important that something has changed. Whereas this, my process from these ridiculous messes of notes that I have.
Well, look, all of this comes with the caveat that this is advice based on how we are currently doing it. We might change our methods.
Oh, yeah. Might not work for you.
You might have a different method that works better for you. We have that for Escape This podcast. Lots of people come on and we say, hey, did you listen to our How to Make a Room episode? Did that help? And a lot of them will say, I listened to it and it's exactly the structure I followed to make a room. Thank you. And then some people will say, yeah, I listened to it. I don't do it that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely not how I made
it.
It.
Hear. Turns out that doesn't work for me.
Didn't work for me. So all of this comes with a
so
gigantic
maybe all
grain
of you
salt.
come up with the murderer last and then edit the crap around it.
Yeah, maybe that'll work
I
for you.
disagree fundamentally, but maybe it works for you, whatever.
But this is the advice that we can give based on how we do it. So there you are. Hopefully, grab this and write your own mysteries and play them with your friends and start competing podcasts and then we'll bury you.
That's what we do.
Bury you into the ground.
Yeah, from experience, that's exactly how we play it.
That's how we deal with it. All right, thank you everybody for listening. Very soon, there will be another mystery, I think. I think very soon, I'm going to say.
I think we can make that happen.
Ideally next week, but who knows? We'll see. There'll be a murder mystery. It'll be Dani running me through an Agatha Christie. Do you want to give us which one it is? Do you want to hint it now? What's the title of the next one? Dani is looking like you just don't know.
Did I write that down anywhere?
That's perfectly fine. Don't worry. It's a mystery.
I have no idea.
It's a mystery for everyone. It's an Agatha Christie story, everybody. It'll be great. I'm going to solve it. You're not going to find it.
I may have just called it Agatha Christie short story.
We don't know what it's called, but I'm going to solve it. All right. Bye.